How successful are you with navigating relationship work and self-care? Have you considered the well-being of your personal boundaries? Today, we dive into the fascinating world of personal boundaries. We will review the signs and symptoms of unhealthy boundaries and empower you with 7 healthy boundaries you can start practicing right now. Welcome to Rekindle XM, where we talk about stress, burnout, and effective ways to recover from the ashes of burnout and rekindle our fire. I am your host, Masha. Before we begin, click that subscribe button and help us reach 1 million hearts by sharing and liking our content. First, let's define the estranged for many term. Therapist aid defines personal boundaries as the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. A person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but they are also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. Everything on the surface may look fine and dandy, yet unknowingly, we may be struggling with unhealthy boundaries. I know I was until I came across self-education that illuminated all the unhealthy boundaries that I was surrounded with. The spread was wide, from self-boundaries to boundaries with others to work boundaries. No wonder the overwhelm and burnout creeped in. So what are the unhealthy boundaries? Therapist Aid gives us a very nice list of signs and symptoms to consider. Here are some signs. Telling all, talking at an intimate level on the first meeting, falling in love with a new acquaintance, falling in love with anyone who reaches out, being overwhelmed by a person, always being preoccupied, acting on a first sexual impulse, being sexual for partner and not self, going against personal values or rights to please others, not noticing when someone else displays inappropriate boundaries, accepting food, gifts, touch, or sex that you don't want, touching a person without asking, taking as much as you can get for the sake of getting, giving as much as you can give for the sake of giving, allowing someone to take as much as they can from you, letting others direct your life, letting others describe your reality, letting others define you, believing others can anticipate your needs, expecting others to fill your needs automatically, falling apart so someone will take care of you, being a rock in order to take care of someone else. Wow, that was heavy. Let's take a deep breath. You probably identified a chunk of this list applied to you. The good news is now you are aware and you can decide what you're going to do with that knowledge next. Think on it as we dive deeper into the traits of unhealthy boundaries. A person who always keeps others at a distance, whether emotionally, physically, or otherwise, is said to have rigid boundaries. Other characteristics of rigid boundaries include avoidance of intimacy and close relationships, unlikely to ask for help, that's the superhero syndrome there, has few close friendships, very protective of personal information, may seem detached even with romantic partners, keeps others at a distance to avoid the possibility of rejection. Alternatively, someone who tends to get too involved with others has porous boundaries. Other characteristics of porous boundaries include oversharing of personal information, difficulty saying no to the requests of others, over-involved with others' problems, dependent on the opinions of others, accepting of abuse or disrespect and then justifying it, fears of rejection if they do not comply with others. The result of unhealthy boundaries can be quite catastrophic and lead into physical, emotional, intellectual, social, spiritual, sexual, and verbal abuse, as well as addiction, to include but not limited to alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and food. You may have had a breakthrough thus far, and that's excellent. Know that you're not alone, and this podcast is here to help you. Now that we have recognized and acknowledged unhealthy boundaries, let's take a deep breath again and explore what healthy boundaries look like. A person with healthy boundaries values own opinions, does not compromise values for others, shares personal information in an appropriate way, does not over or undershare, knows personal wants and needs, and can communicate them, accepting when others say no to them. Most people have a mix of different boundary types. For example, someone who could have healthy boundaries at work and porous boundaries in romantic relationships, and a mix of all three with their family. Remember, the appropriateness of boundaries depends heavily on setting. That's what's appropriate to say when you're at home might not be appropriate to say when you are at work. Furthermore, some cultures have very different expectations when it comes to boundaries. For instance, I grew up in a culture where sharing emotions was wildly inappropriate and a sign of weakness. And in other cultures that I've come to experience, the emotional state being and communicating it was very well accepted and encouraged. And if you didn't share, it was not received well. You were received as an outsider. So very different upbringings there. Now that we understand unhealthy boundaries and applied them to our state of well-being, let's explore the 7 tips for healthy boundaries. First, know your limits. Before becoming involved in a situation, consider what is acceptable for you and what is not. An automatic yes does not allow much time for consideration. If you aren't sure, it's okay to say, let me think about this and get back to you. A no is actually expected majority of the time. Be as specific as possible with yourself when you consider the request, or you might be pulled into a trap of giving just a little bit more over and over until you've given far too much. 2, know your values. Everyone's limits are different and are usually determined by one's personal values. For instance, if you value money over self-care or family time, you may have a habit of coming home too late and not having enough time to spend with your loved ones or on your own well-being and covering it up with excuses. 3, listen to your emotions. If you notice feelings of discomfort or resentment, don't bury them. Instead, seek to understand what those feelings are telling you. I like to say, intuition's never wrong. Every time I failed to listen to my intuition, I ended up in a sticky situation. Because your feeling of resentment, for example, can often be traced to feelings of being taken advantage of. 4, have self-respect. If you are in a habit of always giving to others, ask yourself if you are showing as much respect to yourself as you do to others. People-pleasing are boundaries that are too often and often lead to misguided attempts to be liked by everyone by elevating others' needs above one. Have respect for others is number 5. Be sure that your actions are not self-serving at the expense of others. Interactions are not about winning or taking as much as possible. Instead, consider what's fair to everyone, given the setting and relationships. You might win at the end cost of a relationship's long-term health. Be assertive is number 6. When you know it's time to set a boundary, don't be shy. Say no respectfully, but without ambiguity. If you can make a compromise while respecting your own boundaries, try it. This is a good way to soften the no while showing respect to everyone involved. And 7, consider the long view. Some days you will find more, some days you will give more than you take, and others you will take more than you give. Be willing to take a longer view of relationships when appropriate. But if you're always the one who's giving or taking, there might be a problem. To sum up, Rigid and porous boundaries can be transformed into healthy ones. Everyone has combination of different boundary types. Boundary types can be influenced by cultural upbringing and vary across settings. You can implement healthy boundaries by practicing the 7 tips we discussed today, which are knowing your limits, know your values, listen to your emotions, have respect for yourself, have respect for others, be assertive, and consider the long view. Remember to practice healthy boundaries every day for a more empowered life. See you next time.